Hey, everybody. Thank you for your patience. It was a long weekend, but I am back and I'm still here with The Children of Ark, my published novel about a demon hunter who lives out west. Well, this book is cut into 4 parts, and we finished part 1 on night 7, which was last Thursday. Left you on quite a cliffhanger there. If I could go back and read it to you. I'll read the last sentence for those who weren't here. The trigger pulled. He could hear the bullet gliding down the barrel. So, we definitely have some pretty serious chapter endings in this one. So, I wrote this book in 4 parts. I wanted it to feel serialized, kind of like a graphic novel. So occasionally it jumps backward in time. This latest chapter takes a minute to go back in time for some important information that we might have missed in part 1. So I am happy to take you there now. If you're just coming on now, welcome. This is The Children of Ark, page 86, part 2, 2144 AD. Kevin Marlton turned 9 on August the 14th, 2144. A few days later, for the first time since he was an infant, he returned to visit his prior home. For 34 years, mankind's predator had occupied the earth, and out in this desert, the town of Ark was a place that collected weary travelers and either mixed them into the city's struggle and economy or sent them along to the walled-up border of Los Angeles. Kevin was born to that generation of travelers. But like many children brought to Ark, he was left there while his parents moved on. I know this not because the boy ever told me himself, but because after learning the Marltons had adopted him, the boy had asked his father to show him the place he came from. That was the beginning of Kevin's troubles. Roger drove him by it one day in August of 2144, and Kevin learned the name of the orphanage, Juliana's. Not much came of that visit. Until one day at school lunch, surrounded by 45 of his 135 classmates, Kevin was approached by a girl his age. Pretty eyes drifting upwards, hands grasping the edges of the table as if she were pulling weeds like his mother. Her chin fluttered, and he could tell she was nervous as she sat down next to him. "Why are you looking around like that?" Kevin asked her. "I can't see." She dipped her chin. Kevin suddenly felt sad. He had never met someone like her before, so he had just assumed there was something off about her. "I'm sorry," he said. Then he noticed her hands were folded on the table, and she had no lunchbox. "Do you need food?" Her eyes met his voice. "Somebody knocked me over and took my money. I don't know where they ran." Kevin looked down at his peanut butter and jelly sandwich, his bag of chips, and his banana. "Do you like bananas?" he asked her. She shook her head. "PB&J?" She raised her hand and waved it to say, so-so. Finally, Kevin mentioned his chips, his favorite part of the meal, and before the words even left his lips, she was nodding her head with a smile. Kevin gave them up with a pit in his stomach, but it was nice to see her happy. He said hi to her again while waiting for the bus that day, and before she left, she leaned down over him and pecked him right on the cheek. And that was when Kevin had a realization. He was in love. Over the next several weeks, he started asking his mother to pack him extra lunch, drawing a few slanted stares and pointed questions that he expertly deflected. At every lunch period, he found her again and again. By then, he'd learned her name. Adria. Adria. Gotta go see Adria. It wasn't long before Kevin broke the rules of his household. His father was working late in his office, night after night. His mother doubled up on household chores, and they talked a lot less than they had when he was very little. He told his mother he wanted to join career club and that he would need to stay a little late for after school some days. She believed him. Adria, Adria. She was the only word in his mind. Have to get to Adria. It was practically an impulse. All he wanted was to sit and watch her light up whenever he handed her something. Kevin Marlton, a 9-year-old boy, watching the bus depart from school and then walked alone to the slums of Phoenix. In truth, it wasn't just Adria herself that drew him in. She was an orphan from Juliana's, and he wanted to see her at her house, in their room. There was a long road just off Main Street, connecting the Claymore Circle to the library, which sat on the corner overlooking the baseball district. Along a series of long buildings were a bunch of alleys, and down one, Kevin spied the blue house his father had driven him past. Juliana's was written in black lettering across a whiteboard atop the porch, which stretched from the left to the right of the building. The only way to the backyard was through another narrow alley next to the house. That was where Adria had told him to meet up. He inched through the dank space and came out facing a street he didn't recognize, full of tall, bulky strangers, either smoking, listening to music, or pushing past each other as they rushed by. Some of them looked really dangerous to him, with huge bodies, grunting frowns, and gloves that looked like they had nails attached to the knuckles. "Geez," he gasped as he walked past. "Kevin?" someone cried from above. He looked up to see Adria, her hair braided and her t-shirt red with yarn laces at the collar, her eyes honing in on the sound of his voice, even from that distance. He then measured the fire escape beneath her window. Taking the hint, he climbed up to her room, a moldy space with sleeping bags lined from the window to the door. Adria went and sat down on hers, and Kevin was left standing there, just watching. 2 whole minutes into that, he asked her, "What do you do all day?" "Nothing," she told him with a frown on her face. "There's nothing here for me to do. The bigger kids usually steal all the toys. They're playing downstairs now. I wouldn't even be able to kneel down and feel around on the floor. Last time I did that, somebody stepped on my hand." She held her hand forth and showed Kevin a deep blue bruise from her wrist to her knuckles. "Well, that's not fair," Kevin protested. Adria shrugged. "It's life. At least I have someone to talk to tonight." When a raspy-voiced woman barked, "Dinner!" up the stairs, Kevin heard swarms of voices flooding the room downstairs. That was Gertrude, Adria pointed out. She gently grabbed Kevin's arm. "Can you get me some food? Get some for you, too. Say you need a plate for Sammy. He's been sick in the nurse's room. By the time they figure it out, you'll be on your way home." Kevin boldly marched down the stairs, but when he reached the bottom, he saw a chaotic mess of big kids and little kids, all being sent in different directions by 4 different adults, with more kids rummaging down the stairs behind him, forcing him into a line that streamed into the kitchen, where Gertrude, hunched and unmistakable from her rasping voice, was making plates. "Next!" Eventually, Kevin reached Gertrude and held out 2 hands, but when his plate was full, he didn't move. She turned to him with a wide eye. "Next!" Can I have one for Sammy, too?" Kevin stammered, his courage waning. The woman snorted and called out to the other adults. "John! John! Oh, goodness. John, he's asking for a plate for Sammy. Didn't Leah bring him something? John? Oh, the trail with you." She filled a second place for Kevin. With a smirk, Kevin took them both, then turned past the mob of children to return to Adria. A large hand gripped his arm, and he turned to find the woman peering down at him. He walked up 3 flights of stairs, following the same path to Adria's room. He was just about there when another door opened in front of him, and a tall woman in a white gown stepped into his path, wheeling a cart. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said. She had a hat on with a symbol Kevin had once seen on the hospital building. "It's okay," he said, then trying to sidestep her. "Is that for Sammy?" she said with a slanted eye. "Strange, I already brought him his meal." "No, this is for, Hang on a minute," the nurse said. Her tone had changed, and she was bending down, closely studying his face. "I don't know you." 10 minutes later, his father picked him up. At first, he'd been concerned about Adria and how much trouble she would be in, but that all disappeared when his father gave him that look. In the years since then, Kevin had learned to never lie to his parents. The day he met Richard and handed him a flyer was not only his 10th birthday, but the day he finally got his television rights back. Refined as this young criminal had become, he never forgot about Adria. He still saw her at school, and deep down, he had plans to see her alone again, just as soon as he could earn his father's trust back. In fact, he talked about her openly, so both his father and his mother knew that he couldn't be stopped from seeing her forever. Fallen in love at such a young age, running right to her the second a crisis had begun. You might say Kevin Marlton was a natural-born hero. Or, if you prefer, you might say he was trail bait. And now we return to the present, just after the gun was fired. September 16th, 2145 AD. Richard grasped his neck, his right hand wet with fresh blood. Weight built in his skull. He toppled over, lying still on the grass. Another bang split his ears. "Over here," a familiar voice bellowed. Why should it save his life? He'd fought like an idiot. He'd let people die. What would Bry say if he saw him now? "More will come," said a gurgling voice full of spite. Richard heard those 3 words, but he couldn't see who said it. He could barely keep his eyes open. More will come. Richard carved moon-shaped slits in his chest. Words swam through his mind, yet he couldn't hold on to them. He bled all over the cold stone floor. There was a boy lying ahead of him, crying. He hid his eyes from Richard. Around his neck was a chain with a silver medallion, engraved with a bony hand, unfurling fingers that could have been thorns. Dark coils sprang from the ground like tentacles of tar. They ensnared the boy by his arms and legs, and he began to sink through the ground with a whimpering cry. "Where are you, Richard?" Richard kept his eyes open as spires rose out of the ground. There were 4 of them in total, each one a dark shade of black and blue with a sparkling magenta flash atop each spire. Rising higher, Richard saw windows shaped like little black ovals. From within each window, he saw one candle, glowing with a blue torch, each staring down at him like a million eyes. It grew and stretched itself over the area as it completed its ascent, leaving him to crawl backwards in a desperate attempt to escape. Now he saw barracks beneath the windows and a huge gateway underneath them. A short number of stone steps raised a temple from the ground, yet they could not be seen for long. A celestial mist, blended from all the colors of space dust, oozed from under the temple and rose to cover everything up to Richard's knees. The temple had a kind of magnetism. He felt himself being yanked towards it. He saw the gates open with a fierce gust of monsoon wind. When the gates shut, all he could see was a dark chamber. "Come back, Richard." He opened his eyes and found his arms were held down. Through smeared vision, he saw leather straps around each wrist. They were constricting. He could barely move his forearm, forcing his biceps, which were shredded from using the calipar, to just lay there at his side. "No, no, 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 get these off me. Get them off. Get them off." Richard writhed against their constricting embrace, screaming until his lungs throbbed with pain and his voice finally began to shred, until someone opened the door. He remembered nothing after that. When Richard woke again, he saw light. Fluorescent lights in an ice-cold room. He shivered and reached for the blankets covering him. That was when he noticed that both of his wrists were now free, and he breathed a sigh of relief. Though he remembered nothing else, not his dreams, not the circumstances that brought him here, just collapsing after his fight with Bile and that cowboy, then waking up here. His hands were mummified with white bandages. That was from the burns. His arms, chest, and neck were wrapped as well. That was from the hornets, from the elk, the dogs, from Bile. He also felt incredibly weak. It was like the calipar had reached inside of him and ripped out all his residual energy, transforming it into superhuman levels of strength, speed, and ferocity. And now that he was recovering, he felt like a piece of bread. Slowly, those last few moments came back to him. The room would have been empty if not for a countertop to his left and a long white curtain drawn across the center of the room. The door must have been on either side because he heard raised voices clamoring through the hallways outside the room. He was back at Ramsey Medical Center. He'd bent on his knees, unarmed, the calipar lying beside him. A gun had touched the back of his neck. The cowboy should have shot through his throat, but the bullet had only grazed the side of his neck. There'd been another shot. The cowboy's shoulder had lurched, pulling his hand slightly right of Richard's neck just before he fired. Richard remembered seeing the agent, Kane, rushing the scene, gun handy. The cowboy had fallen beside Richard with a bullet wound in his leg, and the last thing Richard had seen was the white fox insignia tattooed on the cowboy's upper chest. "More will come," he had said, spitting blood. "Trust me, Demon Knight, more will come." And then, darkness. Richard shifted in the hospital bed, feeling a sudden tickle in his nose, and sneezed. "Bless you," said a voice behind the curtain. A familiar face tore the curtain aside, staring at Richard with a weighted but gentle expression. "Roger!" Richard gasped. "You're alive!" Roger approached the bed slowly as if he were walking underwater, managing only the faintest smile. "Hey, Richard. Heard some surprising things about you." "Are you okay?" Richard asked him. Roger shook his head, curling his lip. He pulled over a chair and sat down next to Richard's bed. "Should be more worried about yourself, son. When I heard there was someone fighting back, I couldn't believe it. I thought maybe the president had sent someone over, but I didn't see any helicopters or tanks, nothing. Then I heard your name." Roger brought a gentle hand to Richard's shoulder. Though he remained stiff as a statue, he sniffed loudly. His eyes were sunken in. "Roger, your house," Richard said, the rest of his apology fading like wind. "It's just a house," Roger said with a wide smile, diminishing the haunted look in his eyes. "There's an effort to house the homeless in the wake of this mess. I went to see somebody, and he's helping me out. It's fine. And Evelyn..." "Don't," Roger said. "Just don't. Please." His sunken eyes fell on Richard's for a moment. Without even opening his mouth, he started to shake his head until it fell tearfully into his hands. A weight crashed down on Richard. This was all his fault. "I should have been there," he muttered blankly. "I should have been ready for them. I should have fought better. I should have been prepared." Roger rested a warm hand over his. "We all failed Evelyn, Richard. There is nothing you could have done. Please, just don't bring it up again." "What about Kevin?" Richard cut in. "Is he all right?" The ghost of hope in Roger's eyes faded into a look of pure sorrow. "So, you haven't seen him," the older man said. It was as if the icy room had just frozen over. "What happened to him? Tell me." "He's fine. He'll turn up. He's fine. I have to go. Gotta keep looking. You rest, Richard. Thank you for saving us." "Roger, wait," Richard begged. But Roger was already going, already drawing back the white curtain. In the time it took Richard to wiggle out of his blankets, he heard the door open and close. "Roger!" He then began to mutter, "Oh, the trail with me. What good am I? I should have helped them. Roger, come back!" He dragged himself out of bed and stumbled towards the door. He entered a hallway mobbed by people who had barged past the front desk, overwhelming what remained of the hospital's security, who were running up and down the halls, calling out random names. They clashed with the hospital staff, who were screaming over the crowd for the police to be called. Richard made it 5 steps before one of the guards seized and restrained him. The last time Richard had left Ramsey Medical Center, he had balanced himself on a walking stick and went alone through the market district, hours after the buses had retired. He felt invisible to anyone passing by. Perhaps they thought that an 80-pound dying man wouldn't be much use to their town's survival. But now, as soon as he stepped outside, with no walking stick and not much balance, eyes followed him everywhere. "Is that him?" somebody asked. "That can't be him. He looks half dead." "I'm telling you, that's him." A brown coat was draped over his body, which was otherwise covered with a striped t-shirt and some sweatpants. A nurse told him Roger had stopped by the previous day with clothes before he swept out to continue searching for Kevin. Richard needed to find him. He tried to ignore the eyes following his battered form as he stumbled down Market Street, taking in all the damage one elk and a handful of hornets had managed. So many shops on Market Street had either been burned or caved in, and surviving shops were being fumigated of the pungent odors the fighting had caused. People were lined up on street curbs, just sitting with their heads in their laps, eating their lunches or staring off into space. A few blocks down, he saw ambulances loading stretchers with covered-up bodies. The worst was the silence. He'd never heard so many people in Ark make so little noise. as they moved the wreckage and covered up bodies. If only he could hear that amiable, "Good morning, Ark," once again. He finally arrived at a bus stop halfway between Ramsey Medical and Arkburger. He met some normalcy: a crowded line, a pissed-off bus driver, Delgado, so he was alive. He also spotted Eddie, the man with the white spiky hair who was always causing trouble, somewhere in the middle of the line. Delgado was bringing 10 more people onto the bus, and the line moved in a steady stream away from the nearby bench. Richard's meds were wearing off, so he staggered to sit on the bench instead of rushing. Right now, he just needed to catch his breath. "That's the guy," Delgado's voice. "That's him." Richard, stiff as a statue, managed to look up. Delgado's large, burly figure was descending the stairs of the bus. Only a few passengers waited outside. The rest had boarded, but now they were all looking out their windows, right at him. The man was like a titan to Richard as he swept over the bench. He regarded Richard with a mixture of shock, awe, and disbelief. Eddie and a few others around him stared with narrowed eyes. Delgado nervously brushed his forehead. "You saved our lives," the large man said. And Richard was overwhelmed. He didn't know by what. The attack, his regrets, the broken, nonsensical dreams he was having, his reaction when those leather straps had touched him, his experience being tied to that hospital bed. He said nothing and just stared up at the bus driver. If a demon attacked in that precise moment, the story of Richard Renovon would have been short. "That's not him," Eddie shouted. None of them noticed another man pushing his way off the bus. "Mr. Renovon, you saved my family," Delgado repeated, his eyes growing misty. Eddie walked up next to him, delivering a sharp jab to the bus driver's arm. "If this is the demon knight, then I'm the mayor," he said. Eddie cast a dangerous vibe as he spiked choker and leather gloves that resembled brass knuckles. He towered over Richard with a face that only showed contempt. Richard's eyes darted to the bus driver, sending a wordless signal for help. "Get on the bus, Eddie," Delgado barked. He turned and took a step towards the man, flaunting his superior height and weight, but more people were gathering around them. People just as rough as Eddie stood on both sides of the bench, their eyes drilling Richard accusingly. Eddie seemed suddenly empowered as he chuckled and raised his hand. "Don't know what your problem is, driver. If this guy's really the demon knight, he's got nothing to worry about. Call off your dogs. This man's getting on the bus and going home." Eddie spread his arms, gesturing at the people gathering. "My dogs? My dogs? I think you're misreading the situation." "You don't look like a demon knight," said a burly woman in sunglasses who had appeared at Richard's side. Two other women cracked their knuckles beside her. "Yeah, show us what you can do." Richard looked from left to right, still struggling to find words. "The trail with you all. Just look at his face. That's Richard Renovon. Every single person you saw said it was him fighting those beasts. Stop acting like idiots and get on the bus." "You get on the bus," Eddie said, jabbing Delgado's chest with his finger. He then faced Richard with a twisted, evil eye. "We'll make sure the supposed warrior gets where he needs to go." Richard held his breath as Eddie and others approached the bench, but just then, the spiky-haired man hit the ground. Another man had cut through the crowd and stood centered between them now, making Delgado's eyes go wide. The bus driver couldn't have been half as shocked as Richard to see his rescuer's face. "Luke Motor?" Richard said. The scruffy Main Streeter, unkempt as Richard remembered, the same unbuttoned leather jacket exposing a bare chest, surveyed all of them before settling wide eyes on Richard. "Trail, Renovon, what'd they do to you?" "Back off, hobo," said one of the women as another reached for Luke's shoulder. A knife sliced the man's hand, and Richard watched as Luke spun, making the whole crowd take a full step back. "Quit acting like animals," the Main Streeter said, pointing his knife at whoever came near. Eddie tried to get up from behind him, so Luke flattened his hand with the heel of his boot. "Ah, you mangy! Why don't you all get busy burying your dead, huh?" Luke yelled at the crowd. Then to Delgado, "And why don't you get this damsel in distress on the bus?" Delgado helped Richard up and ushered him towards the doors, and he heard Luke telling them, "I work with this guy on the Marlton crew, and I can tell you, if I ain't blind and deaf, that's your guy. Banged up for saving your ungrateful necks. Now get out of here before he loses his temper and conjures a fire." By the time Luke boarded, Richard had taken an empty seat and Delgado was ready to slam the door shut. All the people who had attacked them were left outside. Luke took his seat next to Richard. Thanks. Seriously, though, what the trail happened to you? You look like a tiger mauled a cat and dressed you up in its flesh, Luke said. Richard's hand still trembled, but the words started to come easier. A lot happened. The artifact blade burned up my hands. The demons I fought did the rest. My ribs broke at one point. I must have burned so many calories because I've never been so hungry. His stomach was now aching with pain every time he took a breath. Luke gently nodded his head. Yeah, well, I caught you doing some pretty epic stuff, so that ain't hard to believe. Why'd you help me? Luke sat back in his seat, his green eyes on the dagger with a drop of blood at the tip. I don't know. Seems like you're no good anymore. The bus cruised down Market Street while some on the road glanced up at them, with shovels and pickaxes in their hands. No matter whose eyes Richard met, misery stared back at them. Welcome to Ark, Luke said. Richard thought of Roger and Evelyn again, of Kevin, of the 60 other kids that had been reported missing from Ark over the last 10 years. People around here get anxious, Luke said. Remember Mayor Wagner, the rallies, all the missing kids, protests? He didn't lose any election, you know. He was pretty much asked to resign, right at the Asher Mansion gates. Yeah, what year was that? Richard asked him. 2140, Luke said. Richard had spent that entire year at death's door. Must have missed it. Well, it was the wrong show to miss, I'll tell you that. Elliot Wagner pledged for 10 years that he'd stop the disappearances, and 60 lost kids later, the whole town rallied outside his gates. He resigned that afternoon, but his people had to wait until after midnight to sneak his butt out of there. Naturally, Merrick pledged to make right on all that. Too bad he's got this crap to deal with. They'd made it all the way to the Claymore Circle, and Luke was still talking Richard's ears off. He knew from their first few encounters that Luke liked to draw attention to himself, but he also thought Luke hated him. Maybe he was wrong. Where are you headed anyway? Luke said. To find Roger, Richard said. He needs my help. Oh, lucky him. They disembarked at the corner of Arkburger, and Richard saw the Claymore Circle for the first time in a couple days. The bones left by the elk had been removed, and the rest of the area had been cleaned up to hide any stains. But there were cracks in the asphalt all throughout the circle. A lone black car was parked up opposite the tavern. Oh, man, do I really have to climb to the bar? Luke said as he took in the rubble beneath the porch. That sucks. Hey, where are you going? Richard had just started towards Main and 10th. To find Roger, he repeated. Well, you're going the wrong way. He's up there, Luke said as he pointed towards the tavern's second floor. Heard Danny talking about it yesterday. Marlton's renting. Richard gazed upwards and inspected the curtained windows above. Did it right in front of me, while turning me down for a job. Can you believe that? I tell him I need a job again, a new place to live, give him a perfect resume, and then Marlton walks in. All of a sudden, I'm out. Can you? Hey! Richard had hoisted himself onto the porch. Inside, a short hallway next to Danny's cellar, filled with cluttered cleaning supplies and towels, there was a rustic staircase. Richard took it up to a narrow, pitch-black hallway with two doors. One was labeled homeowner, and the other, which was half open, was labeled guest. Richard nudged the guest room door open. Hello? The curtains were drawn, but Richard could take in most of the apartment. There was a kitchen tucked into the far right corner, a small, thick television positioned along the same wall, and a sofa to the left next to a tall, portable fan. Past the sofa, there was a hallway, and he figured the bedroom and bathroom would be there. He positioned himself before the hallway and called Roger's name a little louder, but still no one answered. He supposed Roger was out right now, looking for Kevin. Maybe he should have been too, but where would he start? He wandered into the kitchen to pour himself some water when his body started to ache. Pain burned in his hands. His shoulders and sides throbbed. His neck stung. He buckled under the searing cuts along his chest where a gator's paw had slashed him. Richard's knees hit the carpet. Nausea bent him over. Ghosts of hornets, dogs, elks, and reptiles were there, attacking him all at once. He was missing the sword when he needed it the most. Its infectious, regenerating force was the only thing that could dull the pain, but it was gone. He dug into his pocket and crammed a handful of pills down his throat. He didn't even look at the recommended dosage. If they knocked him out, he'd be lucky. For a while, he lay on Roger's floor, just hoping the pain would stop. Down below, there were crashing sounds in the kitchen. "Damn it, Motor, for the last time, get out." "Nice job, Danny. Now you have less food and less plates. I'll tell you what, though, hire me and I'll sneak you some premium deli slices." "Get out of my kitchen," Claymore thundered. A new noise started to block Richard's ears, buzzing with an overpowering squeal. He would soon be back in the dark chamber, and with a scoff of frustration, he hoped that maybe this time he'd come out of it with something to hold on to. A sensation of being underwater replaced the pain. He felt a crushing weight on his head. Hysterical, his mind cycled through everything that had happened the previous day, and despite all the anguish moments there were to pick from, the last thing he settled on were the leather straps. The dark chamber enveloped him. Ahead, he saw only darkness. He was as thin as a skeleton and lacerated all over his body. He hadn't been given food in what felt like weeks. Just beyond the magenta light, the one responsible was watching him. That hadn't changed. This time, though, one thing did. His wrists hurt, and looking down, he saw they were chained. Blood-crusted. Dark manacles attached to chains like thorns fastened into a wall. Then a blinding magenta light shone on two walls of the chamber, his and a woman's, adjacent to his position. Like him, she was chained to the wall. Her face was covered with long, disheveled hair, but Richard still recognized her. "Solene," he whispered. The door flew open, and there was Roger, staring down at Richard with wide eyes. He helped Richard off the floor and sat him down in a rocking chair next to the sofa. Richard leaned forward and a sharp pain shot through him. He wheezed through gritted teeth, both hands clutching the arms of the chair. Roger stood over him with folded arms and eyes glassy with concern. "You need more pills?" Richard felt sick at the thought of suffering even one more of these white-hot shooting stars under his skin. On the other hand, he'd taken half the bottle. "Yeah," he said. But then, no, maybe not. "Something else? I've got water. I've got liquor." Roger drifted towards the kitchen, as if his mind were already made up. Water. Cold. Before Roger disappeared into the tiny kitchen, he pulled the curtains, lighting the room with sunset rays. Richard realized then how long he'd been passed out on the floor. He left Ramsey Medical Center in the morning. Now his favorite show lit up the sky, and he was over 10 blocks away from his front row seat. With his mind's eye, he drew the slopes of the desert along the black apartment walls. Roger returned with cold bottled water, a faint smile on his face. "Didn't I tell you to rest? You should not be out of the hospital." "They only keep you for 2 days due to patient overflow," he said, reciting their stagnant policy. "They kicked me out." He untwisted the bottle cap for Richard and gently handed him the bottle, which Richard drank in a single gulp. "You have got to be kidding me," Roger said. "Without you, this entire place would be rubble." Richard couldn't help but smile. He'd internalized so many apologies to the older man, fearing he would tell him not to bring it up again. Though he grieved, it moved him to hear Roger's affirmations. "You're living here now?" Though Roger looked around the sunny room with that same half-smile, his eyes seemed to stare through every wall. "Yeah. Not much, but while I search for Kevin, it'll have to do." "And you're sure he was taken? That he's not just hiding somewhere?" Richard couldn't imagine a child doing anything else. Listening to all those roars, all those buildings crashing down, the screaming, and the sounds of blood spattering, but Roger shook his head and drew an item from his pocket. When Richard saw it, he was at first confused, but then he took in its shape, and his heart fell. He now understood why Roger feared the worst, as it dangled there before him. Kevin's cross. "I gave him this last year. It has a personally encrypted message. Thrive. I found it stomped into the dirt in front of Juliana's. Roger, I'm sorry. I should have been there. I should have. Richard, I already told you there was nothing you could have done, so stop saying that." A long silence passed in which Richard didn't dare say a word. He just stood and watched his boss silently come to terms with his own emotions. A beast demolished my house, man. A mob ran over my wife. Stampeded over like beasts. Never even looked back. Now someone's taken my son. The people in this town only care about themselves. The way things are, long may we live, long may I live. I don't know who would hurt a boy, but I'm going to find him, and I'm going to get my son back. It doesn't matter what he did or didn't do. It doesn't matter what you did or didn't do. We're here now. We all did what we did. He fought the urge to apologize. Roger noted his silence. Richard, can you help me find him? I will, Richard pledged. I'll bring Kevin home to you, Roger. Some light returned to Roger's eyes. He almost smiled. Bang, bang, bang. Richard tensed up at the sound of gunshots, but they weren't shots. Someone had knocked on the door. Mail, said the voice of Danny Claymore, while Richard tried to calm his shaking hands. And I have one here for the Silent Giant. It's from the mayor's office. Thanks, Roger shut the door and quizzically handed the letter to Richard. The envelope was addressed, Richard Renovon, from the office of Alfred E. Merrick, Mayor. The man sees everyone, but no one can see him, Roger scoffed. Surprised, Richard gently took the envelope. He tore it open and unfolded a piece of paper. The letter was handwritten in black ink. Mr. Renovon, first, I would like to personally thank and commend you for defending our city-state against a shocking and devastating invasion. Sadly, that invasion is not yet over. We are currently investigating 15 simultaneous disappearances that link back to the White Fox, the terrorist group that entered our town with 4 demons in tow. Additionally, it has been brought to my attention that you might be close to the Marlton family, the patriarch of which has recently reported a missing son. This news saddens me greatly. My administration will use all its powers to locate the young Mr. Marlton. I ask only that you allow us some time. Additionally, you may have noticed that during the White Fox invasion, 25 more demons attacked our city-state from the air. It is commonly known that when a demon attacks a city or town, more will follow. I confess myself powerless to control this turn of events, but that's where you come in. We managed to excavate the artifact blade from the scene of your last battle, and we have been keeping it safe for you. You don't know me, Mr. Renovon, but I am a transparent man. I believe that the truth and only the truth may prevail in a time of crisis, so I will make this confession plainly. You are not properly trained to be the wielder of an artifact blade, but I can help you. It would seem the demon trapped within the artifact blade has taken a liking to you. For that reason, I would like to offer you a position in my cabinet. This position's title is as follows: City-State Wielder, an expert in demonic arts. However, should you accept and lead a campaign that becomes as successful as I intend, the people will no doubt dub you the Demon Knight of Ark. And that ends that chapter. Thank you very much for listening. Let's check in with the comments real quick. Need water. Andrew, my guy, thank you for leaving comments. I don't know why StreamYard ain't showing them to me. Yeah, that's weird, but what can you do? Yes, Luke, he's very funny. It's funny. I write a lot of different books and a lot of different book series, but Luke has that special brand of levity that you just don't always get. That's why I always enjoy returning to this book. One of the reasons I enjoy returning to this book. In fact, a lot of my favorite things about it are in that chapter I just read. Richard's inner mental turmoil, his strange dreams, the hints and clues and weird images that, indicate what kind of horrific past he has, and just Luke and all of his, comments breaking up the tension. Also Roger's grief over his lost son. Those were all really the driving emotional factors that always propelled me through the story long enough to see it published. So yeah, that was definitely a fun read for me. Well, it looks like I've come to the end of the comments there. So as always, if you scroll down the videos, you can find the link in a previous episode. If you're interested in buying the book to see all that happens next, please do. And I will see you guys next time. Good night, everybody. I'll play you out with this cool trailer here. Haha, surprise, surprise. That's my other book, Barker's Rules, my first published novel from 2017. If you're interested in that, consider clicking the link and buying that one as well. All right, for real this time. Good night, everybody.